This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Livestock economist Lee Schulz from Iowa State University begins today's show with a cattle market update. Lee discusses the current market, the cattle inventory report, and cattle market lingo. Continuing the show is Lexi Hayes with information about the upcoming K-State Junior Sheep and Beef Producer Days. K-State agricultural economist Robin Reid also reminds people about the Women Managing the Farm Conference and Farm and Ranch Transition meetings. Learning about what fish to stock ponds with in today's show as K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken fills us in. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update. And this week we're joined by Iowa State University livestock economist Lee Schulz. Lee, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me again.
Lee, going to talk about the cattle inventory report here soon, but first, kind of doing our usual rundown. And first, what does cash look like?
Well, overall, last week, cash was rather strong. I think when you look across different regions of the U.S. for fed cattle trade, we really ranged from $3 higher when you look at Texas to maybe a little bit weaker in the increases here in the northern states, maybe $2 to $3 higher. And I would argue that really the bullishness in the cash trade really was supportive when we look at futures markets. Futures markets were up, again, $2 to $3. Relative strength there, even stronger when you look at the feeder cattle markets. I think when you think about the disruptions we've had with weather over the last couple of weeks, it may be easy to forget that given how warm weather has been now, but those disruptions really disrupted, the movement of cattle. I think especially when you look at feeder cattle trade, and some of this is that pent up demand. When we look at auction markets have been really strong. That's shown here in feeder cattle futures prices. And, you have to point to the corn market being slightly down, being again supportive of the trade for feeder cattle.
So maybe settling out here in a couple of weeks of getting past that recent weather conditions we've had?
Yeah, I think we'll start to see the markets normalize here. And I would argue we already have. When you look at slaughter levels, you could really argue that slaughter levels have normalized after some of the smaller slaughter weeks. This last week, through Saturday, we were from the previous week up 3.1%. So, I think we've kind of returned to those normal slaughter levels. And, I'll point out that, weights remain notably lower than a year ago and then even the previous week. So there's really no indication that we're backing up cattle. I know there was some concern when we look at cattle on feed reports that those cattle over 120 days, over 90 days on feed were rather large compared to a year ago levels. I think that's much more of that we placed them a lot younger. And so it's going to take them longer to grow rather than we're backing cattle up. And I think, all indications that we're pretty timely in our cattle marketing.
And what are we seeing for box beef cutout?
Well, the box beef trade, not surprisingly, we are seeing some seasonal decline here. And I think that's really expected to continue. This is a time period where we see a bit of a lull when you get post-holidays and really before we are in the ramp up of summer grilling. Now, I pointed out the weather's been so good. In my neighborhood, I've been smelling a lot of grills that are running already. So, maybe there is some indication that, we could see maybe a bit of earlier run in some of that demand. But, I'm not too all surprised when you look at a bit of weakness when you look at the cutout values.
And Lee, getting to that cattle inventory report, something that only comes out twice a year. And this one's a little special, the one that comes out in January.
It is. So it's the only one that gives us the state by state numbers. And so in July, we get the national update on the cattle inventory numbers. Here in January, we get the state levels as well as the national. Really, it helps us benchmark those inventory levels. And I wouldn't say it's a bit different than looking at the cattle on feed reports, which are going to impact short-term markets because we're looking at cattle that have been marketed, cattle that have been placed, and what's currently on feed. And that's going to really drive that supply situation short term. When we look at the cattle inventory report, That's a bit different. We're looking at more of those medium and longer term impacts. So we talk a lot about the cattle cycle, the position in the cattle cycle, where the beef cow numbers are, and maybe where we are going to potentially start to see some expansion here going forward.
And for this report that came out on the 31st, what did you guys see?
First is, I would argue there wasn't too many surprises. So we get about a couple days before the reports on pre-report expectations. So there's several analysts that are willing to put out their estimates. We thank them for that. And that kind of gives a general sentiment of where we think those numbers are going to go. And then when USDA reports the actual estimates, we can compare to those pre-report. And by and large, the numbers were within pre-report expectations or the range on those numbers. So, I wouldn't expect the markets to react much of the surprises there. I actually have to give credit to the analysts. When you look at beef cow numbers, milk cow numbers, they actually hit those numbers right on the head. So pretty impressive there. We start to see some variability when you look at replacement heifer numbers because, there I think you're going to see more situations driven by state. And those numbers are a little bit more difficult to get a grasp on because understanding in a situation like now where heifers are worth a lot, right, as feeder cattle, that's a decision that producers need to be making. Are they going to retain those heifers? Are they going to market them as feeder cattle? And sometimes there's really some two-way situations that it's difficult to measure those until they are actually in the feedlot or actually being retained.
And on the replacement heifer numbers, some states quite a ways down.
They were, and the state that I'm sitting in Iowa, we were down 13% in heifers held for beef cow replacement. If you compare that to nationally we were only down about 1.4% in heifers held for replacement. Looking at Kansas, they were down 19% year over year when you look at those replacement heifer numbers. And so I think collectively, it looks like we may be starting to see the cow herd start to steady. We've seen high culling rates, but nationally at least, we're not seeing a large decline in replacement heifer numbers. But state by state, and really states that have been impacted by drought, I think you've seen much larger year-over-year declines when you look at those replacement heifer numbers. So again, I think some places this year may start to see some expansion if they have the resources to do it. Certainly, we've seen some profitability levels return, and that's going to incentivize some expansion. But nationally, if you look at those replacement heifer numbers, look at the situation where we're still dealing with drought in much of the U.S., especially in the central part here, I think that's going to limit the ability to expand for the next year.
Overall, then, this report just really confirming that numbers are down, but not too substantially.
It is very much a confirmation of the fundamentals. And I think one other big number to highlight here is if you look at what the feeder cattle supplies, not currently in feedlots, but are going to be placed in feedlots soon, right? So it's a combination of that calf crop and then those feeder cattle supplies that are out there. Those were down 1.6% compared to January 1 of 2015. Why I make that comparison is that's the last low in that feeder cattle supply inventory number. And we're still probably a year or two off from potentially that low in the feeder cattle supply number. And so I think that's important to keep in mind that from a supply standpoint, that's setting up for a very bullish situation when we look at how tight supplies are going to go and how responsive prices potentially can be.
Lee, transitioning from talking about the cattle inventory report to a recent article you wrote titled Keys to Understanding Cattle Market Report Lingo. And the first piece of lingo you use is receipts and supplies or offerings. And what does that mean?
Yeah, just to back up a little bit, this is our article I've been wanting to write a long time just to, I might be a kind of a data nerd and enjoy reading reports and really appreciate what USDA does on reporting transactions of cattle. And when you look at these reports, sometimes there's a narrative included that helps give you a little bit more of a signals in the marketplace. And as you mentioned, one of those is when you're looking at those receipts or supply or offerings, it gives a degree of maybe how large those supplies are. And then, sometimes you might hear something like light test. And if it's a light test, it means too few cattle are actually being sold, that it's difficult for reporters to actually give a feel for the price direction. So in that case, I would put less credence in what those numbers are showing than if there's really large numbers, large receipts or large supplies that are giving you a good direction, a trend in that market.
And another term in this article is trends.
So you might hear something here like firm or steady or weak, or you might actually hear something like prices being higher or lower. And when they use terms with higher or lower, those market reporters are actually going to usually attach how much higher or lower. And so earlier when we kicked off this cattle market segment, I mentioned that we've seen cash prices $2 to $3 higher, right? And so that was a trend we actually seen this last week when you look at that fed cattle trade, that there was enough trade to be reported to really give us some confidence in understanding that that trend was higher, and we gave a dollar figure for that.
Two more terms to talk about, and the first one being something really important when we talk about economics: demand.
So demand, you're going to hear, a variety of potential terms used here, something like very good, good, moderate, light, very light demand. And this demand really could be cattle specific.
And the last term you included in this article, trade activity.
So trade activity, this is one that, they may or may not mention it because really when you're looking at trade activity, it's compared to the pace of normal trading. Right. And sometimes it's difficult to know what that normal pace of trading is. So you could hear terms like active, moderate, slow, or even inactive trade activity. And so that really tells you how available supplies or offerings are clearing the market. An example, inactive trade is when sales are intermittent with few buyers or sellers. So going back to those winter weather disruptions we've had, that can certainly impact trade activity. And a lot of reasons why we see markets actually close during those winter weather patterns, because you may not have buyers or sellers there, or a mismatch of buyers or sellers, and that's really going to impact the trade activity.
That was Iowa State University livestock economist Lee Schulz. I will link the cattle market inventory report in today's show notes, as well as Lee's article titled Keys to Understanding Cattle Market Report Lingo. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing some upcoming youth livestock events at K-State. And then to talk about them, we're joined by K-State Youth Livestock Coordinator Lexi Hayes. Lexi, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Lexi, what are some of these upcoming K-State Youth Livestock events?
Well, this spring, we have the Junior Producer Days that are coming up. And since we are in an even year, we will be doing a beef and a sheep day, and we host the swine and meat goat days in odd years. So this year, we'll be focusing on beef and sheep.
What are these different things that people can learn at these Junior Producer Days?
Absolutely. So these are one-day educational events for families. They are geared towards youth, but we encourage the whole family to come, especially if it's a family that is new to the project. Extension agents, it's really open to anyone that wants to come and learn about that project, but we'll be covering a variety of topics from selection to nutrition, and then at the end of the day, we'll have some showmanship and grooming and clipping demos as well.
So really anyone who's just started the project or who's maybe even been in it for 10 years?
Correct. We will cover a wide range of topics to make sure that everyone that comes learns something new to take home and apply to their project for the upcoming year.
And who teaches these topics for the youth?
We have a variety of speakers coming in. Some of them are faculty members, and then we also have both K-State undergrad students, graduate students, and then we'll have some guest speakers as well. So we have a variety of expertise areas.
And when do the Junior Producer Days get started?
We'll be starting at about 9 o'clock for both days. Registration tables will open at 8, and we'll start with selection for both days. So, and then we'll go into some breakout sessions. So families can pick and choose what workshops they want to go to make sure they tailor the educational day towards what their needs are.
So everything happening on the K-State campus then?
Yes, absolutely. We'll actually be in Weber Arena this year, and so it's exciting that we'll get to close out the year with having these events in Weber Arena.
And as the day kind of rounds out around 3:30, what else is taking place after that?
So after the program officially closes, there'll be some optional courses at the end of the day, one being YQCA, Youth for the Quality Care of Animals, which is a youth livestock quality assurance program. It is required for any child that's going to go on and show at the state fair or junior livestock show. And then there are a few county fairs that require it as well. And so they need to talk to their local office about what those requirements may be. But it is an annual training, and so it's a good opportunity that if they're already here, they can go ahead and knock out that training as well and be set for the year. And while that training is going on for the kids, I'll also be hosting a state livestock nomination session for parents and some of those older youth so they understand what the process looks like if they're going to nominate for the state fair or junior livestock show this year.
Is the YQCA training something that youth need to do every single year?
Yes, it is an annual training, so it has to be done every year, and it'll be good for a full year.
Looking specifically at the Beef Junior Producer Day, when does pre-registration end?
So the day is actually going to be on March 2nd is when the event actually happens, but the deadline to register is February 12th. So it's coming up really quickly, but that is the deadline to get the early fee of $20 a person and then also a T-shirt. Only those that register by that deadline will be able to get a T-shirt for this year's event.
A couple weeks later, then, is the Sheep Junior Producer Day, and what is the timeline for that?
Correct. So the Junior Sheep Producer Day will be on March 16th, which for a lot of people is going to be the second weekend of their spring break. And the deadline to register for that is February 26th. And once again, the fee is $20 a person, and all attendees, both youth and adults, need to register. And also that deadline is the deadline to get a T-shirt for Sheep Day as well.
And if they get past that deadline but still would like to come, what does it cost for them to attend?
The late registration fee is $25 a person, and then obviously they don't get a T-shirt. So that would be the downside of waiting to register after the deadline is no T-shirt, but we still welcome you to come and learn. That's the intent of these, is to provide education for our families and give them the opportunity to learn about their project.
If someone doesn't realize these Junior Producer Days are happening till the day before, are people able to just go ahead and walk in that morning?
Yes, they can walk in. If they realize it the day before, we'd prefer that they call or email, and we'll send them the materials to walk in with to do an on-site registration, but we do welcome people to show up the day of.
If people would like to find out more information about these youth livestock events, where can they do it?
They can actually go to the Junior Producer Days tab on our website, and it's actually easiest to find if you just Google K-State Youth Livestock Program. It'll take you to our landing page. Then we have an events tab, and Junior Producer Days is under that, or we have a bit.ly to register that is bit.ly/KSU ASI register.
Lexi, thank you for taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about these upcoming Junior Producer Days.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Shelby.
That was K-State Youth Livestock Coordinator Lexi Hayes discussing the upcoming K-State Junior Producer Days. The first one is the Junior Beef Producer Day, taking place March 2nd. Pre-registration for that is due February 12th if you'd like to pay $20 and receive a shirt. After the 12th of February, registration will be $25 and you're welcome to walk in the day of. The following Junior Producer Day is the Junior Sheep Producer Day, taking place March 16th, and pre-registration for that is due February 26th. Once again, pre-registration is $20 and you will receive a shirt, and after that, registration is $25. Lexi says the best way to find more information about these days is searching for the K-State Youth Livestock Program and clicking on the Events tab. I will, of course, link this information in today's show notes on acttoday.net. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by K-State agricultural economist Robin Reid as she reminds us about some upcoming events. First, she reminds us about the upcoming Women Managing the Farm Conference taking place here in Manhattan, Kansas, February 14th through the 16th. Robin, if people would like to get registered for this event, how's the best way to do that?
So the easiest thing is to go to the website, www.womenmanagingthefarm.com, and you can see all of the information, the agenda, registration, bios of the keynote speakers. All of that information is on the website, and that's the best place to go to register as well. You can register completely online there. Pre-conference sessions are additional $25. If you register after January 18th, the price does go up to $200. One special thing that we started last year is also a student rate, and that could be for high school students, that could be for college students, that could be for traditional women that happen to be going back to school right now. But that rate is $75, and that does not increase after the 18th. We really want to encourage students to attend this conference as well.
That was Robin Reid sharing with us some information about the Women Managing the Farm Conference taking place February 14th through the 16th. Registration is now $200. Unless you are a student in some capacity, then it is only $75. You can find more information about this by going to womenmanagingthefarm.com. Robin once again is going to tell us about another conference coming up, and this one being the Farm and Ranch Transition Conferences. And Robin, what are those conferences?
These are all-day conferences held in 3 locations across the state to make it convenient for anyone to attend, but really the goal is to help producers, farmers, landowners learn about successful ways to transition their farm, how to start those conversations, how to develop plans, and then how to put those plans in place. So this is an extremely important conference for anybody involved in production agriculture.
Robin, when and where are these conferences taking place?
These conferences will be held starting March 6th in Garden City, March 7th in Great Bend, and March 8th in Manhattan. And again, it's the same conference at every location, but just trying to make it convenient for everybody across the state.
And when should people get registered for them if they're looking to attend?
And we would encourage families to attend, not just individuals, everybody that's involved in the farming operation to attend together. They need to be registered a week before the conference, so that would be end of February.
And what is cost of registration?
Registration will be $60 per person.
If people would like to find out more information, Robin, where can they do that?
The easiest place to go is agmanager.info, so our extension website on our events page, and you will see all the information on each of the conferences.
And these conferences are being put on by the Office of Farm and Ranch Transition. So if they're looking for other resources related to this conference, where can they find those?
So yes, our Office of Farm and Ranch Transition offers services year-round, not just these conferences. We offer a land link program, one-on-one consultations, and just resources for farm transition. They have their own website that's linked on agmanager.info. Otherwise, you can go to agcansitions.org. So transitions with a K, agcansitions.org.
Once again, that was K-State agricultural economist Robin Reid discussing the upcoming Kansas Farm and Ranch Transition Conferences. The first one is March 6th in Garden City, and following that, the next one is Thursday, March 7th in Great Bend, and after that, they're in Manhattan, Kansas on the 8th. You can find more information about these conferences by going to agcansitions.org. That is agkansitions.org. And as always, you can find more information about events coming from the Agricultural Economics Department at agmanager.info. I would also like to remind you that it's not too late if you'd like to attend the 2024 Swine Profitability Conference that is happening tomorrow, February 6th at the Stanley Stout Center. Registration is at 9:15, and you are welcome to register at the door for $50. You can find more information about this event at ksuswine.org. I will link the resources to all of these upcoming events in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Joe, today wanting to talk about stocking fish in ponds, and why is this something we want to be thinking about right now?
Sure, we've all been cold, we've all been hunkered down, but this warmer weather's got us thinking about spring. And spring's a really good time. Once the pond starts to become productive, you start to get a lot of little plants and small animals growing in your pond. Great time to think about stocking, putting fish into that pond, especially if it's a new pond.
And as we're thinking about those new ponds, what fish are the best for them?
That's going to depend on your goals of your pond, right? Most people like to have a bass pond that they're fishing for bass, and so you'd want to stock the prey for those bass. And so thinking about bluegill and in new ponds, fathead minnows. So we generally stock those and then wait a season or a year. So our goal there is for those fish that we stock to have as many babies as they can and grow up and have a ton of food so that when we do put those predators in, they can go to town eating a bunch of food and growing really fast. If we stock all of the fish together, all of the prey fish and the predators together, a lot of times the predators will eat those prey. and then there won't be any to reproduce and make new food. And so we want to kind of make sure we stagger that stocking. That's generally something people don't think about when they think about putting fish in their pond.
What about for maybe those ponds that are a little bit older?
Yeah, so older ponds might be a little bit different. The first thing you want to do is know what fish you have in your pond, right? So go out and fish your pond. Get out there and kind of look at what you have that way. There's more advanced ways of looking at it. You can hire someone to electrofish it if you really want to know what fish are there. But getting an idea of what you have before you add more fish is really important. When I'm out looking at ponds, far more often I see ponds that need to have a bunch of fish taken out of them as opposed to putting more fish in. So if you have an older pond, definitely look at what you have and talk to your local extension agent or myself and make sure they kind of talk you through what to look for in your pond. Make sure it's healthy and happy before we add more fish to it.
And talking about adding fish, what about the channel catfish?
Yeah, a lot of people like to fish for channel catfish. I mean, if you like to fish for them, they're a great fish to add to your pond. A lot of times channel catfish don't reproduce in farm ponds and smaller ponds. So they're kind of a fish that if you're going to have channel catfish and you're going to harvest them to eat them, you want to make sure that you're adding some back every year. The rule of thumb is to add 2 to 3 for every one you take out. That'll account for the mortality of harvesting them, but also some natural mortality. So that'll kind of make sure that you kind of have that sustained fishery. Channel catfish, like I said, they're a bonus fish. If you like them, you can add them to your pond. I'd add them when you add your largemouth bass or your predators. If you don't like them or don't want them, you don't have to have them. They don't really affect the ecosystem all that much.
And how important is it to have a habitat for those fish when you get them added in?
Yeah, that's vitally important. And so making sure we have the habitat and the right habitat. And when we think about habitat, we tend to think about the fish we want to catch. And so we're thinking about bass and making sure they have a fun place to hang out. But we need to be thinking about those little prey fish as well. They need to have places to hide when they're little so that they can grow up and be the right size prey for some bigger fish. So having habitat, and again, habitat for all the different sizes of fish in your pond is really important. If you just stock fish and you don't have any habitat, you're probably not going to be very successful just throwing that money away, and no one wants to do that.
And thinking about throwing that money away, fathead minnows?
Yeah, so a lot of people like to buy fathead minnows and throw them in their pond, and that's great for a new pond. In established ponds, I generally don't recommend those. So the minnows, it takes about 10 pounds of minnows to gain 1 pound of predator biomass. And so making sure that if you're adding those fatted minnows, you're really taking that into account. Fatted minnows right now are somewhere in the $10 to $15 range a pound. And so 10 pounds of those, we're talking somewhere around $150 for 1 pound of bass. You'd probably be a lot more successful with that money putting it into some habitat modifications, for example, to grow up the bluegill that are naturally reproducing and providing that food to your pond than you are by adding those fathead minnows.
For people who are ready to buy some fish, where do they need to do that?
Great place to start for that is the Kansas Aquaculture Association. So members of the KAA, the Kansas Aquaculture Association, are great fish farmers and producers throughout the state. And so I would recommend that you go check out that association and find someone that's affiliated with them. That way you know you're kind of getting a quality product and someone's going to stand behind those fish that they're adding to your pond.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.